That dress is wasted on a criminal. The second cuff clicked shut over Maya Renee Collins' left wrist with a sound that seemed to swallow every other noise in the room. The gasps, the organ that had gone silent. Mid-chord. The soft crying of someone in the third pew who hadn't stopped since the side door banged open 7 minutes ago. And everything that was supposed to be the most beautiful morning of Maya's life became something else entirely. Something cold and metallic and deliberately cruel, and when the steel bit into the skin just above her old scar, the one that curved along the inside of her wrist like a faded question mark, pale and quiet. The kind of mark that only people who looked closely enough would ever notice. Maya did not cry out, did not flinch, did not give Officer Derek Holt the satisfaction of seeing her break. She breathed. That was all. 47 minutes earlier, New Hope Baptist Church sat at the corner of Whitfield and Elm in Clover County, Georgia. The way certain buildings sit, not just occupying space, but claiming it. The way a grandmother claims her chair at the head of the table with a quiet authority that doesn't require anyone's permission, that has simply always been, and will simply always be. And if you grew up in Clover County, you knew that New Hope had survived things that should have destroyed it. A county vote in 1962 that tried to rezone the property out from under the congregation. A fire in 1987 that took the East Wing and 3 of the 4 original stained glass windows, and 3 hurricanes whose names the oldest members still recited, in order like scripture, and the church had outlasted every single one of them, rebuilt each time by the same hands that had always rebuilt it. And so on a Thursday morning in late October, with the Georgia air carrying the particular sweetness of honeysuckle and wood smoke, that meant the season was turning the pews of New Hope filled with 200 people who had driven from 4 different counties to witness what everyone agreed was long overdue. The flower arrangements were white roses and eucalyptus chosen by Maya herself after 3 weeks of deliberation because she believed the way she believed most things, quietly and completely, that simplicity said more than abundance ever could. And the florist had done something with the greenery that made the whole sanctuary smell like a garden that had just finished raining clean and alive and expectant, and near the front of the church tucked against the altar rail. 6 white candles burned with steady, unhurried flames that seemed to have decided this occasion was worth their full attention. In the bridal room at the back of the church, Maya stood before a narrow mirror while her Aunt Gloria worked the last button of the ivory gown closed between her fingers, both of them watching each other's reflection with the particular tenderness of women who have known each other long enough to have run out of the need for most words. "Hold still," baby Gloria murmured, though Maya hadn't moved. "I'm still," Maya said. "You're thinking," Gloria corrected. "When you think hard enough, you vibrate. Always have. Since you were 9 years old doing your homework at my kitchen table." Maya almost smiled at that, and she looked down at the bouquet resting on the small table beside her, white roses gathered with a silk ribbon and tucked just beneath the ribbon wrapped around the stems where it would stay pressed close to her hand. Throughout the ceremony was her father's pocket square, white cotton ironed flat, with his initials embroidered in the corner in navy thread so small you had to know to look for it. And she had placed it there herself that morning before anyone else arrived, slowly and deliberately, because carrying something of his into a room where she was making promises felt like the truest form of prayer she knew. Her father had been gone 11 years, and there were still mornings when the grief of it arrived fresh, unexpected, like a step that wasn't where you thought it was. And today was one of those mornings, but she had made her peace with that, because grief and joy were not opposites, and never had been. And she understood that better now than she had at 23 when he died. "You look like him," Gloria said softly, smoothing the back of the gown, the way he stood when he was sure of something. "That's what you look like right now." Maya didn't answer, but she straightened slightly, which was its own kind of answer. Out in the sanctuary, Isaiah Tate stood at the altar in a charcoal suit with a white pocket square of his own, no embroidery, just clean linen pressed sharp. And if you had asked anyone in the first 3 rows what he looked like waiting for her, they would have told you. He looked like a man who had already decided long before this morning that whatever came next was worth it, and his stillness was not nervousness, but the particular calm of someone who knows exactly where he is supposed to be and has arrived without apology. Isaiah was the county sheriff, a fact that most of the people in those pews carried with a certain pride, because he was theirs, in the way that people claim someone who came from the same streets and the same schools and the same particular combination of struggle and stubbornness that produces occasionally someone extraordinary. And he had earned the office not through family connections or convenient timing, but through 15 years of showing up, of doing the work, even when the work was invisible, of being the kind of officer who remembered the names of the people he served and understood that a badge was a relationship, not a trophy. At the rear of the church, a young man named Caleb Morrow stood with a camera bag slung over one shoulder and a second camera mounted on a small tripod he had positioned near the side entrance. Not the obvious angle, not the one that would catch the altar and the vows and the kiss, but the angle that caught the door, the side aisle, the space where things arrived from outside the ceremony, and if anyone had asked him why he'd set it there, he would have said something about wanting to capture the moment the bride appeared, which was true as far as it went. But there was something else in the way he kept glancing at it, something methodical and careful in the way he had checked its battery twice and confirmed the audio was running, that suggested Caleb Morrow paid attention to things that other people forgot to notice. 2 blocks away on the far side of Whitfield Street, a silver Buick sat idling against the curb with its engine barely audible. And the man behind the wheel was Captain Warren Stills, 57 years old, silver blonde hair gone mostly silver, now wearing a gray suit jacket over a pressed white shirt, and he was looking at the church doors with the detached calibrating attention of a man who is not watching something happen, but confirming that something is about to. And after exactly 40 seconds, he tapped the dashboard once with 2 fingers. A small, precise gesture that contained an entire decision, and then he pulled into traffic and drove away without looking back, because men like Warren Stills never looked back at things they had already set in motion. Inside New Hope Baptist Church, the organ began. The first notes rose into the high ceiling and settled over the congregation the way music settles when it's played in a room that was built for it. Full and resonant and slightly larger than what any single body could hold, and 200 people turned in their seats toward the back of the sanctuary, toward the doors that were about to open toward the moment they had driven from 4 counties to witness. The doors opened. Maya Renee Collins stepped into the aisle in her ivory gown holding white roses, and her father's pocket square wrapped around the stems, and for one long, complete moment, the church held its breath in the way that only beautiful things can make a room hold its breath, and everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. Then the side door banged open, and Officer Derek Holt walked in. He didn't apologize for the noise. That was the first thing people remembered afterward. Not the badge, not the folder tucked under his arm, not even what he said first, but the fact that he let the door bang and then walked forward without pausing, without acknowledging that he had just split open a moment that 200 people had traveled to witness, and that absence of apology told you something immediate and complete about Derek Holt. 41 years old, sandy blonde hair worn close at the sides, the kind of man who had spent 14 years in a uniform and learned from it not humility, but the particular dangerous confidence of someone who has never once been told that the room he walked into was not his to enter. He moved down the center aisle with his eyes already fixed on the altar, and the congregation turned to watch him, the way people watch something approaching that they cannot yet name. And Reverend Eloise Hayward, who was 73 years old, and had been standing at the altar rail preparing to open the ceremony, went completely still with her Bible open in both hands, because she had been pastor of New Hope for 31 years, and she recognized this particular species of interruption. Holt raised his voice before he reached the front of the church loud enough to carry to every corner of the sanctuary, loud enough to reach the 6 children sitting in the 3rd row, and the 3 choir members still in their robes in the side pews. and the elderly woman in the back, who was hard of hearing on her left side but heard this perfectly fine. "Maya Renee Collins," he said, reading the name from the open folder like he was reading a charge at a podium, like the altar and the flowers and the 200 witnesses were a courtroom he had walked into by appointment. "You are wanted for fraud, identity theft, and connection to the death of a man named Leonard Fay." The church reacted in waves. The first wave was silence, a particular total silence that lasted maybe 2 seconds and felt much longer, the kind that happens when something occurs that the mind cannot immediately categorize, when the brain is still running its search for the context that would make sense of what just happened, and coming back empty. The second wave was sound. A woman gasped near the center aisle, then another, and then a child. A small girl in the 4th row in a pink dress with a ribbon in her hair began to cry with the simple, uncomplicated distress of someone who doesn't understand what is happening, but understands perfectly that it is wrong. And a man near the back stood up, and then after a moment sat back down as if he had risen on instinct and then remembered that instinct alone wouldn't be enough here. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. Maya had stopped walking the moment Holt began speaking, and she stood in the middle of the aisle in her ivory gown with the bouquet still in her hands, and the expression on her face was not the expression people expected, which would have been fear or shock, or the particular crumbling that comes when a person is publicly accused of something terrible. It was something more measured than that, something that took a moment to read. And when you read it, you recognized it as the face of a woman who is thinking very quickly and very clearly about what her next move needs to be. She turned to find Aunt Gloria in the pews. Gloria was in the 2nd row, and what happened in her face in that moment was something that Maya would carry with her for weeks afterward. Not as anger, but as a wound that required careful tending, because Gloria did not speak, did not stand, did not say, "That is a lie, and I know this woman and I will not sit here while you do this to her in the house of God." And what she did instead was look at Maya with eyes that were filling with something that was not doubt, exactly, but was its border, was the edge of doubt, was the face of a woman whose love was being tested by fear, and who was in that moment failing the test. And that was somehow worse than an accusation from a stranger, because it came from love, because it came from someone who was supposed to know her name better than any document ever could. Officer Isaiah said from the altar, his voice completely level. "You need to stop speaking and show proof." Holt turned toward him with the unhurried confidence of a man who expects his badge to do the work for him. "Step back," he said. "This doesn't concern you." "She is the woman I'm marrying," Isaiah said, still in that same level voice, still not moving from where he stood. "That concerns me." "Step back," Sheriff Holt repeated, and there was something in the way he emphasized the title, not respect, but weaponization, a reminder that the jurisdiction here was his, that whatever authority Isaiah carried as county sheriff did not extend to this folder, this alert, this morning. And Isaiah looked at Maya, and Maya's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward him. "Wait," it said. "Not yet. Not like this." Isaiah stepped back. Holt opened the folder wider and held it up so the front rows could see a printed photograph, grainy from the quality of the surveillance camera that had produced it, showing a black woman entering a downtown bank branch. The image just clear enough to establish height, build, skin tone, long dark hair swept over one shoulder, and just blurry enough to establish nothing else with certainty, and a murmur moved through the pews as people leaned toward each other to see it. "That is not me," Maya said clearly. The suspect opened an account under the name Maya R. Collins. Holt continued pulling another page from the folder and reading it in the flat procedural tone of someone performing for an audience rather than communicating with a person. The account was opened with your date of birth. The signature on the financial authorization form matches your name. A phone number on the paperwork was previously registered to you. "That number was mine 8 years ago," Maya said. "I haven't used it since I left Macon." Holt barely glanced up. A man named Leonard Fay was found dead after transferring money to the account. His family identified the woman he met with as someone calling herself Maya Collins. "That was not me," Maya said again, and this time her voice was not raised, but it was different. It had an edge that the first repetition hadn't had an edge that came from the specific fury of being required to deny something true, of having to use her words as defensive tools when they should have been unnecessary. And she turned slightly toward the folder in Holt's hand and said, "Let me see the document." Holt angled it just enough, not a courtesy, a performance, and Maya leaned forward and looked, and then she did something that nobody in that church expected. She began identifying the errors out loud methodically, one at a time, in a voice that was perfectly clear and carried to every corner of the room. "The birth year is wrong by 1 digit, she said. "The address listed is not any place I have ever lived. And that signature," she pointed without touching the paper. "The second loop in the W is wrong. My father taught me to sign my name when I was 12 years old, and there is a specific way I form the W in Collins, and whoever copied my signature did not know that, and I can prove it against any document I have ever signed in my adult life." For a moment no one in the church spoke. Reverend Hayward descended from the altar rail with her Bible still open, and she walked toward Holt with the measured, unhurried pace of someone who has 31 years of practice standing between harm and the people in her care. "Officer," she said, "if you have entered this house with the law, then honor the law. Let her counsel review the warrant. This woman is standing before her church, her family, and her God. You will speak carefully in this room." Holt barely glanced at her. "Reverend, she's wanted in connection with a homicide," he said, and the word homicide landed in the church the way certain words land heavier than their syllables should allow, with a weight that temporarily rearranges the air, and Maya saw it move through the faces in the pews like a current. Saw Aunt Gloria's hand go to her mouth. Saw a cousin near the side aisle. Lower his eyes, saw a man she had known since childhood. Look away from her with an expression she recognized as the thing that happens when love encounters something it isn't prepared for, and chooses, in that instant, the path of least resistance. The bouquet shook. She felt it before she saw it, a tremor moving through her hands, involuntary and honest. The body registering what the mind was working to control, and one white rose worked itself loose from the silk ribbon and fell, turning once in the air and landed on the floor near the front pew, and the white pocket square with her father's initials was still wrapped around the stems in her hands, and she looked down at it for exactly 1 second, and then looked up. "Let me see the warrant," she said to Holt. "Signed by a judge. Show it to me, or show it to my attorney." "You can read it downtown," Holt said. Isaiah moved forward. "You have done enough damage. Show a valid judicial warrant or explain to this room why you cannot." "I said step back." "Sheriff," Holt said, and there was something in his voice that had shifted, something that was no longer purely procedural, but was now faintly personal. The register of a man who does not like being questioned in front of an audience and is beginning to experience the friction of it. The cuffs came out. A fresh current of shock moved through the church, a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a cry, but was somewhere between them, the sound of 200 people registering simultaneously that this was not going to stop before it became something that could not be undone. Reverend Hayward lifted her hand. "Officer Cole," and then she corrected herself. "Officer, that is unnecessary." Holt did not look at her. "Maya Williams," he said, and he used the wrong last name, which was the kind of detail that would matter later. "Turn around." Maya turned not because she was surrendering, but because she understood with a clarity that felt like cold water. That one wrong movement in the next 30 seconds could become the only story anyone remembered about this morning, and she was not going to give him that. And so she turned, and the first cuff closed around her right wrist, and then the second closed over the old scar on her left wrist, the curved, faded mark that had been there for 2 years, and Holt tightened them more than he needed to, and the metal bit in, and Maya's jaw tightened, but she made no sound. "They're too tight," Isaiah said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. Holt did not respond. Holt guided her toward the aisle with a hand at her elbow that was not quite a grip and not quite a shove, but was somewhere in that space that men like Holt occupied. The space where authority becomes cruelty through increments, small enough to deny, and the train of Maya's gown caught on the edge of a pew, and he kept walking, and her hip struck the polished wood, and she absorbed the pain without making it visible, because she had already decided that her body was not going to be the story. At the church doors, she stopped. Holt pulled at her arm, but she had planted her feet, and she turned as much as the cuffs allowed, and she looked back at 200 faces. Some of them crying, some of them frozen, some of them looking at the floor, and she said raw and clear, without raising her voice above the level of a woman speaking to a room she had known her whole life. "My name is Maya Renee Collins. I did not kill Leonard Fay. I did not steal his money. I did not run from the law. Someone put my name inside a lie, and I will prove it." Holt said, "Move." She looked at Isaiah standing in the aisle with her bouquet in his hands, the white pocket square still wrapped around the stems, and she said, "The ceremony is not over. It is only delayed." Then the door closed behind her. The white rose was still on the floor near the front pew, and nobody moved to pick it up, and the candles near the altar kept burning steady and patient as if they had decided to wait. The patrol car smelled of upholstery cleaner and stale fast food, and the particular sourness of a vehicle that had carried too many frightened people too many times, and Maya sat in the back seat with her cuffed hands behind her and watched Clover County pass outside the window with the deliberate attention of someone who needs something to anchor herself to. Because if she looked at her reflection in the glass, she would see her wedding dress, and if she let herself think about the wedding dress, she would think about the church, and if she thought about the church, she would think about Aunt Gloria's face, and she was not ready to think about that yet. A barber shop on Clement Street with 3 men talking in the doorway. The peach cobbler sign above the diner at the corner of 4th and Main, hand-painted, faded to a pale orange that the owner kept meaning to refresh. The American flag above the courthouse snapping slowly in the October wind. She watched all of it with the careful blankness of someone memorizing a landscape they expect to need later. And in the front seat, Derek Holt drove without speaking, adjusting his mirror once to find her eyes, and she looked back at him without expression, and he looked away first. Clover County Police Department was a brick building from the 1970s that had been renovated twice without ever quite losing the feeling of the original decade. The low ceilings, the fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency just below conscious irritation, the smell of burned coffee so deeply embedded in the walls that it had become architectural, and above the front desk a poster read, "Community Trust Begins." Here in the official department font, and Maya looked at it when Holt brought her through the side entrance and thought about all the things that statement required that this building had not recently provided. The interview room was gray. 1 table bolted to the floor, 1 cuff securing her left wrist to the table's metal ring, which meant her injured wrist, the one with the old scar and the fresh marks from Holt's cuffs. And the pain of that was specific and localized, and she breathed through it the way she had learned to breathe through things that were worth enduring. "I want an attorney," she said before Holt had even sat down. "You'll get your call. I want this documented, the condition of my wrists, the time of my arrival, and the name of every officer present." Holt dropped the folder on the table in front of her. "Everything's documented. That's what worries you." He leaned over the table with the slow, deliberate lean of a man who has used physical proximity as a tool for long enough that it has become instinct, and he said, "Same name, same birth date, same old phone number, same face in that photograph. That's a lot of same for someone who says she doesn't know anything about it." "The birth year was wrong," Maya said. "The address was wrong. The signature had an error in a letter I have signed the same way for 22 years. And that photograph is grainy enough to fit 200 women in this county." "Close enough," Holt said. "Close enough is not the law," Maya said, and she held his gaze without blinking, and something shifted in his eyes, not doubt exactly, but the faintest friction of a man encountering a response that doesn't fit the script he was given. The door opened, Desk Sergeant Roy Elam looked to be in his mid-50s with the careful, watchful quality of someone who has seen enough in 23 years behind that desk to have developed a very sensitive instrument for detecting when something is wrong. And he stood in the doorway looking at Maya's wedding dress, and then at the cuff on her wrist, and then at Holt, and he said with the particular quietness of a man who is choosing his words to carry the maximum weight at minimum volume, "Is it signed Derek?" Holt said it came through the system. Elam said, "That's not what I asked." The silence that followed was only 4 seconds long, but it was the kind of 4 seconds in which a great deal becomes clear to everyone in the room. A knock at the door broke it. Another officer leaned in from the hallway. "There's a man in the lobby, Isaiah Tate. Says he's here for her. Tell him to wait," Holt said. "He's the county sheriff," the officer said carefully. "Tell him to wait," Holt repeated. Maya felt the tight coil of relief somewhere behind her sternum, and she kept her face still, and Elam pointed toward the hallway and said to Holt, "Give her the call," with a tone that did not leave room for negotiation, and Holt's jaw worked once before he uncuffed her from the table and walked her to the phone on the wall, and she dialed Leonard Okafor's number from memory, because she had put it there deliberately years ago in the category of numbers a person should always know by heart. Leonard Okafor answered on the second ring. "It's Maya," she said. "The warrant is defective. Wrong birth year, wrong address. Questionable signature. Unclear photo. They brought me through the side entrance of Clover County PD. My wrists are marked. Are you hurt?" "I'm standing." Maya. The cuffs were too tight on the left. "I'm standing. Leonard. Don't sign anything. Don't answer anything until I'm in the room. I know. I'm 11 minutes away." Holt reached for the receiver. Maya said quickly, "Isaiah is in the lobby. Tell him I'll bring him in," Leonard said. "Hold your head up." The line went dead. Leonard Okafor arrived in 9 minutes, not 11, wearing a brown suit that had the comfortable ease of something worn often enough to have stopped being formal and started being simply his. And he carried an old leather briefcase with a clasp that clicked with the particular authority of a sound that has been repeating itself for 30 years. And he looked at Maya's wrists before he looked at anything else in the room, and then he looked at Holt. And then he set his briefcase on the table and said simply and without preamble, "Remove the restraints." "She's a homicide suspect," Holt said. Leonard placed a single document on the table, a printed summary of the defective alert identifiers prepared with a speed that suggested he had anticipated this possibility before he even received the call, and said, "She is being held on a system alert with 3 mismatched identifying fields and no verified judicial signature. If you have a signed warrant, produce it now. If you do not, my client is leaving this room in the next 3 minutes." Elam appeared in the doorway again. He looked at Holt. He said, "Unlock her, Derek." The cuffs came off. The pain that followed was the particular, almost sweet pain of blood returning to a place that had been held too tightly, and Maya flexed her fingers carefully and looked at the marks on her wrists. The fresh red lines, and beneath them on the left, the older curved scar, and she did not let herself think about what those marks would look like tomorrow when the redness had darkened into something more permanent. Isaiah was behind Leonard in the doorway, still in his wedding suit, still holding the bouquet with the white pocket square wrapped around the stems, and when Maya reached for him, he took her hand, with the particular gentleness of someone who is choosing very carefully how much of what he's feeling he allows into his grip. "Let's go," he said. They walked out through the front entrance, and every officer in the station seemed to find something urgent to look at in the opposite direction. And outside, the Georgia evening had settled over Clover County, with a deep blue that turned the streetlights golden, and Maya stopped on the front steps and breathed the outside air, honeysuckle still faintly and wood smoke, and looked back once at the doors of the building. Someone had built a lie and put her name inside it. Tomorrow she would find out who held the pen. She was dressed before dawn. The dark blue suit was the one she wore to federal depositions. The one her father had once told her looked like she meant business without having to say so. And she stood in front of the bathroom mirror at Isaiah's house in the blue-gray light of 5:45 in the morning and fastened each button slowly and deliberately, the way you prepare for something that requires your full attention. And behind her on the closet door, the ivory wedding gown hung like a second self. Still beautiful, the hem slightly creased from the night before, and she looked at it once in the mirror and then looked at herself instead. The marks on her wrists had darkened overnight, as she had known they would. Isaiah appeared in the doorway in his full sheriff's uniform, and his eyes went to her wrists. Immediately, he couldn't help it. It was the thing his eyes did first in every room, now finding the evidence of what Holt had done. And Maya said, without looking away from the mirror, "Don't." I didn't say anything. "You were about to be careful with me," she said. "I need you to be careful with the case. Save the careful for the right thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You sure you want to do this today?" Maya looked at herself in the mirror, 34 years old. Dark suit wrists marked father's pocket square folded and tucked into her jacket pocket where she would carry it all day. "If I wait," she said, "they write the first chapter." "I'm not waiting." Leonard Okafor was already parked outside when they came down, brown sedan idling at the curb, and behind him, 2 black county vehicles carried Patrice Bell, county council chairwoman, 60-something, silver braids, the measured efficiency of a woman who had spent decades navigating institutional resistance and had long ago stopped finding it surprising, along with County Attorney Raymond Vick and Independent Oversight Representative Nora Gill, who carried a recorder in her bag, and the expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of call for a very long time. Maya carried no bouquet this morning, only the pocket square folded flat inside her jacket, and the exact inventory of every error in that warrant committed to memory. Clover County Police Department looked different in daylight, plainer, more ordinary, the kind of building that depended on institutional authority for its weight, because the architecture alone could not provide it. And when they came through the front entrance, officers with coffee cups looked up and then made the small, practiced adjustments of people recalibrating quickly in response to a change in the room. Captain Warren Stills was already in the conference room. He was standing at the whiteboard when they entered, marker in hand. Silver blonde hair, neat gray suit perfectly pressed, and he was speaking to a room full of officers and supervisors and union representatives in the tone he had cultivated over 28 years in this department. The tone of a man who is always the most reasonable person present, who meets every difficult situation with the patient. Fatherly gravity of someone who is deeply sorry that things have come to this and deeply committed to making sure they go no further. Holt was near the back wall with his arms crossed in the stiff, expectant posture of someone waiting for praise. Stills had already begun. The department had acted on available information. The interruption at the church was genuinely unfortunate, and the department was committed to transparency, and no one should allow a difficult moment to become a political event. Holt gave a small, satisfied nod. The door opened. Maya walked in first, and Holt's expression went from satisfied to irritated in the fraction of a second that it took him to categorize her presence as intrusive as someone who had wandered into the wrong room, and then Isaiah walked in behind her in his full sheriff's uniform, and then Leonard Okafor, and then Patrice Bell, and then Raymond Vick, and then Nora Gill, and the room changed with each entrance the way a room changes when the balance of power inside it shifts, not loudly, not with announcement, but with the unmistakable physics of it. Still's hand tightened around the marker. "Miss Williams," he said, and his voice was still smooth, still the voice of the most reasonable man in any room. "This is a closed departmental meeting." Patrice Bell stepped forward. "Not anymore," she said, and the 2 words carried 30 years of knowing exactly when to use them. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone set down a coffee cup too hard. A union representative looked at the wall. Stills forced a smile. One of those smiles that is constructed rather than felt, assembled from the outside in, and it sat on his face with the slight wrongness of something built to specifications rather than grown from feeling. "Madam Chairwoman, if this is about yesterday, I assure you, "It is about yesterday," Bell said, "and today, and the next 4 years of this county." And then she said the thing that made Holt's face go the color of old chalk and made Still's hand close slowly around the marker he was holding. Effective immediately, Maya Renee Collins would serve as chief of police for Clover County. Sheriff Isaiah Tate would oversee interagency coordination and compliance during the transition. The silence that followed was absolute. Maya stepped to the front of the room. She had thought about what she was going to say, and she had decided it would be short because short was harder to argue with than long. And she looked at the room at the officers who had come in that morning expecting one kind of meeting and were getting another kind entirely at Holt near the wall, who was still processing at Stills, who was already calculating, who had already begun the work of adjusting his position, which she could see in his eyes that particular shift, and she said, "Yesterday someone used this department to interrupt my wedding, accuse me of murder in front of my family, and place false documents before 200 witnesses. Today, I am here to determine whether that was incompetence, corruption, or something larger. We will begin with the records." No one moved. Holt swallowed. Stills had recovered his expression, had reassembled it into something that looked like concern. "Chief Williams," he said with respect, "any review of this matter should be handled externally. You are personally involved. That's a conflict of interest that no one in this room can ignore. That is why Maya said County Attorney Vic Independent Oversight and Sheriff Tate are all in this room. Every step will be logged. Every document will be preserved. Every action will be reviewable." "That sounds excessive," Stills said pleasantly. "Arresting a bride at her altar was excessive," Isaiah said from near the door, and several officers looked at the floor. Maya produced the first order from her jacket pocket and placed it on the conference table. All records connected to the alert filed under her name were hereby frozen. No deletion, no modification, no reclassification, including system logs, dispatch notes, warrant queries, internal communications, body camera data, and all access history for the prior 72 hours. She looked up from the paper and across the room near the far wall by the filing cabinets. Her eyes found something she hadn't been looking for. A woman who was not looking at her was deliberately not looking at her, whose nameplate read Donna Raines, whose knuckles had gone white around the pen she was gripping, and who was staring at the middle distance with the particular expression of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and has just realized in this exact moment that there might be a place to finally set it down. Stills was still talking, still pleasant, still the most reasonable man in the room, and Stills did not notice Donna Raines at all. Maya did not look away from her. Donna Raines found Maya in the records hallway 40 minutes after the meeting broke apart, after Stills left with his practiced unhurry, after the officers dispersed back to the machinery of a morning that had been substantially rearranged after Holt retreated to somewhere Maya would track down later, and Donna appeared around the corner of the records division corridor with a stack of folders pressed against her chest, and a look on her face that Maya recognized immediately, the look of someone who has been carrying a decision for a long time and has finally run out of reasons not to make it. "Chief Williams," she said quietly, "do you have a minute?" Isaiah beside Maya studied her with the careful attention he brought to things that mattered. "Should county oversight be present?" Donna shook her head. "Maybe later. Not for the first part." "Walk with me," Maya said. The records division was a long room lined floor to ceiling with metal filing cabinets in 4 different shades of gray, which told you the decade each section had been installed if you knew how to read it, and the room smelled of toner and old paper and the burned coffee that was apparently the base note of this entire building, and there were 2 printers humming quietly at either end that seemed to be doing nothing in particular, but humming with great commitment, and Donna shut the door behind them and stood with her back to it and looked at Maya with eyes that had been holding something for a long time. 22 years, Donna said. "I've worked in this building 22 years, long enough to know the difference between a mistake and a pattern." Maya said nothing. She had learned over years of work that required people to tell her things they were afraid to say, that silence offered at the right moment was an invitation. "The alert under your name," Donna said. It was entered 38 minutes before Officer Holt arrived at the church, before Holt even clocked in yesterday morning. Isaiah's eyes sharpened. Who entered it? "That's the problem," Donna said. "The login belongs to an inactive administrative account. Account hadn't been used in 14 months. Inactive accounts don't access themselves." She opened the first folder and slid it across the small side table between them. Printed screenshots, access timestamps, system logs, each page dated in the corner with the meticulous care of someone who had been copying these things carefully over time, with the particular diligence of someone who doesn't know when she'll need them, but knows that she will. The account was accessed from Terminal 4C, she said. Record station, second corridor. Whoever used it knew enough to create an alert that would look official under pressure but not clean enough to survive a real audit. Maya looked at the pages. Was mine the first? Donna looked down at the folder in her hands. The silence answered before her words did. "I started checking. Donna said after you left last night. I searched the correction logs alerts that were amended within 48 hours of filing. Mismatched birth dates, old phone numbers, recycled addresses." She opened the second folder and laid it beside the first. 31 cases, 6 years. The number sat in the room. "Who were they?" Isaiah asked. Donna's voice had the quality of a person reciting something they have rehearsed because rehearsing it was the only way to get through it. Mostly black residents. Business owners, contractors, a nurse manager up for a hospital promotion, a woman running for city council in the 3rd District, a real estate developer whose project was coming up for county approval. People with something to build toward. People with assets and no political protection. "And the timing?" Maya said. "Always strange," Donna said, and her mouth tightened. One alert appeared the morning of a loan closing. One 3 days before a licensing renewal hearing. One the week a contractor was supposed to sign a county infrastructure agreement. One she paused the day before a church fundraiser where a man was going to announce he was running for county commissioner. Maya was looking at the names, the dates. The case numbers' lives, reduced to the clean impersonal language of administrative records made small by bureaucratic shorthand, and she thought about how much courage it took to build something in a place that wasn't built to hold you. How many mornings you had to get up and try again before anything took root, and how completely one document, one alert, one morning could take all of that apart. "A third-party contact," Donna said, opening the third folder. "Someone outside the department. A man named Garrett Cross. He presented himself as a compliance consultant. After each alert, he would contact the affected person within 24 hours. He told them he could make the problem go away." She paused. "For a fee." "What kind of fee?" Isaiah said. $10,000 at the low end, 35 at the high end. Donna slid another page forward. One business owner paid $68,000. He had a county contract pending. He paid, and the alert disappeared inside 40 hours, reclassified as a clerical error. She was quiet for a moment. Another man paid in a different way. He transferred 35% of his barbershop. Didn't have the cash. Signed over part of what he'd spent 8 years building. "Where did the money go?" Maya asked. "A company called Meridian Civic Group," Donna said. "Clean name, no real office rotating mailing addresses. It looks like a community development fund until you look at where the money moves." Maya looked at the bottom of the folder stack and saw the last file. The one with the red paper clip attached to the corner, a small, ordinary red paper clip, the kind you buy by the box and never think about. And something about its smallness against the weight of what it was marking made her chest tighten before she even touched it. She touched it. "Thomas Ware," Donna said softly. "Owned a trucking company. 5 employees' county contracts had been operating for 11 years. The alert appeared 3 days before he was supposed to sign a new county waste management agreement, the biggest contract he'd ever landed." She stopped. He refused to pay Garrett Cross. He said he hadn't done anything wrong and he wasn't going to pay for something he hadn't done. "What happened?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer was going to live in her somewhere after she heard it. Lost the contract. The alert stayed. Word spread the way word spreads in a small county. His insurance company got nervous. A bank called in a business line of credit. He spent 4 months fighting it, and then he ran out of fight. Donna looked at the table. His daughter still lives here. Her name is Keisha. She works at the elementary school on Mercer. The room was very quiet. Isaiah said, "You were not the first," and he was saying it to Maya, and it was both true and insufficient the way true things sometimes are. "No," Maya said. "I was just the first they couldn't swallow." Donna looked up and her eyes were full of something that had been there a long time, not just the knowledge of these 31 files, but the specific gravity of having known and stayed quiet, of having told herself that she couldn't have done anything, of having told herself that story long enough that she almost believed it. "I stayed quiet because I was afraid," she said. "I have a mortgage. I have a daughter in her 2nd year of college. I thought..." She stopped. I told myself there was nothing I could do. Maya let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to sit. Then she said, "Silence isn't neutral. You know that." Donna nodded. Her jaw tightened. "I know that now." "You knew it then too," Maya said, not unkindly. "But you came forward today. That matters. Right now, today, that is the thing that matters." She called Leonard Okafor. She called Patrice Bell. She told Donna, "From this moment forward, what you've brought us goes through proper chain of custody, witness transfer, formal documentation, whistleblower protection. No hallway secrets that can be twisted later." Donna looked almost relieved, the way people look when they have been waiting for someone to tell them exactly how to do the right thing. Maya looked at the folder with the red paperclip and did not open it further. She had seen what she needed to see: a name, a business, a daughter named Keisha, who worked at the elementary school on Mercer, a man who had refused to pay for something he hadn't done, and had paid for that refusal with everything. She thought about Aunt Gloria's face in the church pew. She thought about the way doubt, when it arrives wearing the face of love, cuts deeper than contempt ever could. And then the records room door opened and Warren Stills stood in the doorway in his gray suit, and he took in the open folders and the 2 women standing over them and Isaiah near the wall, and his expression remained perfectly pleasant. The face of a man who is mildly curious about what he's walked into and has absolutely no concern whatsoever, and he said warmly, "This looks like a conversation that should have been scheduled." Maya closed the top folder. "Good," she said. "You're here. You can explain why an inactive account inside your department created a false homicide alert under my name 38 minutes before my wedding." The warmth in Still's expression did not leave. But something shifted behind it, something small and cold, like a gear turning somewhere beneath the surface. "That sounds like speculation," he said. "Then let's make it documentation," Maya said. She held his gaze and did not look away, and Donna Raines straightened behind her, and Warren Stills, for the first time in a very long time, was in a room where all the variables were no longer his. Vera Sims arrived at Leonard Okafor's office above the old pharmacy on Main Street at 8 that evening with a canvas tote bag, a stainless steel tumbler of unsweetened tea, and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead that came down to the end of her nose the moment she opened her laptop, and she looked at the first folder from Donna's stack for approximately 45 seconds before she said, without looking up, Meridian Civic Group. "That's your pipe." "Shell company?" Leonard asked. "More like a broom closet with a bank account and very good paperwork," Vera said. "Registered in Savannah. No real office, rotating mailing address. Same registered agent who's opened 11 other LLCs in the past 8 years. No employees I can find. Pays its taxes, just right. Not so little. It draws scrutiny, not so much it suggests real revenue." She turned the laptop toward the room. "But the payments moving through it are real enough." The room had expanded since the afternoon. Leonard, Isaiah, Maya, Donna. Nora Gill from Oversight and Patrice Bell around a conference table that had been cleared of everything except evidence folders and people's respective coffees. And through the tall windows above Main Street, the county was going about its Thursday evening, and the distance between the ordinary world outside and what was being assembled on the table inside the room had a particular texture that Maya kept noticing the way large, quiet crimes always looked from the outside, like nothing at all. Vera had the chart built within 20 minutes, her particular gift translating the deliberately obscure language of financial movement into something a room full of non-accountants could read and recognize, and she walked them through it without condescension and without unnecessary technical detail. The way someone explains a map to people who need to know where they are rather than how maps are made. False alert filed in the system. Within 24 hours, Garrett Cross contacts the victim phone call, sometimes in person, always presenting himself as someone who understands the system and can navigate it for a reasonable fee. Money moves to Meridian Civic Group, or to one of 3 connected LLCs with names similarly designed to sound like legitimate civic organizations. Alert disappears, reclassified in the system as a clerical correction. Total visible money, Vera said, is approximately $940,000 across 6 years and 31 confirmed cases. The number lived in the room differently than numbers usually did. 3 victims didn't pay cash, Vera continued. They paid in equity. A barber on Clement Street transferred 35% ownership of his shop, 8 years of building that business, transferred in one document signed under duress. She clicked to the next page. A contractor transferred title on $60,000 worth of equipment. A caterer gave up profit participation rights on a county vendor contract she'd spent 2 years securing. Vera removed her reading glasses and set them on the table. They couldn't be bled of money, so they were bled of something else. "Where does Meridian's money go?" Isaiah asked. Vera had been waiting for this. She turned the laptop again, and on the screen was a chart that showed Meridian Civic Group at the center, with lines running to Garrett Cross's personal accounts, to the 3 shell LLCs, and then traced through 2 degrees of separation, but traced clearly documented with payment memos and banking records that Vera had obtained through legitimate channels with the efficiency of someone who had done this kind of work for 30 years to a family trust. The trust was connected to Warren Stills's son-in-law. One payment memo in the trust's records read simply, "W.S. Advisory approved, Raymond Vick." The county attorney exhaled slowly through his nose. "That's extortion," he said. With extremely good stationery, Vera agreed. The room was quiet for a moment, and then Leonard said, "The video," and everyone looked at the door because Caleb Morrow was standing in it with his camera bag. The same bag he had carried into New Hope Baptist Church that morning as a wedding videographer, and he set it on the table and opened it with the careful movements of someone handling something that belongs to someone else. "I brought everything he said. Raw footage. Neither card has been connected to a network. I haven't uploaded anything." He looked at Maya. "That day still belonged to you. I wasn't going to be the one to release it." He handed the memory cards and a small hard drive to Nora, who logged each item, photographed the labels, and began transferring the files with the unhurried precision that made evidence hold up when someone tried to argue against it later. The first footage was from the primary camera. The altar. The flowers. Isaiah's face. When the organ began, Maya stepping into the aisle the moment that was supposed to define the morning, and for a few seconds, nobody in the room said anything. And Donna looked down at the table because she had not been at the wedding, and watching it felt like trespassing on something sacred. Then Holt walked through the side door, and everything changed, and Maya watched herself from outside. Herself, which was a strange and clarifying thing to experience. And what she noticed that she hadn't been able to notice at the time was how completely deliberate Holt had been, the pace of him, the angle he chose down the aisle, the particular timing of when he raised his voice, all of it calibrated for maximum exposure, maximum audience, maximum shame. He wanted it public, she said quietly. He needed it public. That was the point. "Second camera," Caleb said. Rear of the church, the angle I set up toward the side entrance. The footage shifted to a different angle, the back of the sanctuary, the side door, and there was Holt. 9 minutes before he entered the church, standing just outside the door with another officer checking his phone, and then leaning in close and speaking. And the audio was faint under the ambient sound of the church interior. But Nora turned up the volume and the room leaned forward, and what they heard in Holt's voice was, Stills said, "Do it during the vows, before she becomes his wife." Nobody moved. The other officer said something inaudible. Holt said, "Just do it clean. Folder leads with the homicide." "That's what holds a church," Vera said very quietly. He wanted the shame to land before she had any legal standing as Isaiah's wife. "He planned for the vows specifically," Leonard said. "He planned for the ceremony to be the audience," Maya said. "He needed the family in the room. He needed 200 people who loved me to hear that accusation before I had any context to answer it." She paused. "Because the shame wasn't incidental. The shame was the product," Caleb said. "There's one more thing." The second camera inside it caught the inside of Holt's folder during the confrontation. Angle was wrong for most of it, but when you turned to look at the birth date and he shifted the folder, there's about 4 seconds where the inside cover is visible. Nora ran the contrast enhancement on the still frame and the image sharpened degree by degree until the sticky note on the inside of Holt's folder became readable, not perfectly, but clearly enough in the way that clearly enough is all that the truth ever actually needs. Use old number. Homicide angle. Push hard. WS. The room absorbed this. Nora said, "That's sufficient to preserve Holt's personal phone immediately." Isaiah was already reaching for his. "I'll have a warrant request moving through outside counsel within the hour." Nothing through Still's chain of command. "No shortcuts," Maya said. "Everything goes through custody. Every step logged." Leonard was writing notes. Vera was organizing the financial records into a presentation order that a council room could follow. Donna was sitting at the end of the table with her hands flat in front of her, and she looked like someone who had finally put down a weight so long carried that she had forgotten it had a specific shape, and now that it was on the table, she could see exactly how heavy it had been. Maya's phone vibrated. Unknown number. She looked at it once, then showed it to Isaiah, then answered and put it on speaker. A man's voice, low and processed through something that softened it into unidentifiability, said, "Stop digging before the county learns what kind of woman you really are." The line went dead. Nora logged the call, immediately noted the time, the duration, the number. Leonard said, "That's witness intimidation." Maya looked out the window at Main Street at the diner sign flickering red across the dark glass at the ordinary Thursday evening of Clover County, moving past below at the people who trusted the system because life was genuinely too hard to question every stamp and every signature. "No," she said. "That's confirmation." She handed the phone to Nora. "They wouldn't be calling if we weren't close enough to something that mattered." She looked back at the table. The access logs, the financial trail, the video, the sticky note with 2 initials that did not belong to half the county. Confirmation, she thought again. Not a warning. A confirmation. And across town in an office that still smelled of Warren Still's expensive cologne, a phone was being put down by a man who had just made the specific kind of mistake that people make when they have never once in 28 years been made to account for themselves. Warren Stills understood better than most people in his position that the first person to speak publicly sets the terms of the conversation, and the person who sets the terms of the conversation controls what the conversation is about. And the person who controls what the conversation is about controls in a very real and practical sense what people believe about what happened, at least in the short term. And the short term was what he needed right now. He chose the courthouse steps because he understood symbols the way he understood everything, practically instrumentally as tools, rather than as meanings. And the courthouse steps said legitimacy and public service. And a man who has nothing to hide speaks in the open. and he arrived at 9 in the morning in his gray suit with a blue tie that he had selected because blue read as trustworthy on camera, and the reporters were already there with their equipment and their coffee cups and the slightly impatient energy of people who have been told a story is coming and are waiting for it to begin. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. He was in the way that certain skilled men are almost impossible to argue with in real time, because he never said anything that could be directly refuted. He only arranged things that were technically true into an order that implied something false, and the implication did the work that the lie would have done if he'd been willing to risk one. The department had acted on available information. The incident at New Hope Baptist Church was genuinely unfortunate, and no one wanted to see a ceremony disrupted. But the new chief, young, personally invested in the outcome, understandably emotional after a very difficult experience, was attempting to turn that difficult moment into something it was not. The county deserved experienced leadership. It deserved stability. It could not afford to be led by personal grievance dressed up as institutional reform. He used the phrase reasonable observers 4 times. He said personally involved 3 times. He said grief can cloud judgment once, and it was the most effective sentence he spoke because it offered the people watching a sympathetic interpretation of Maya's actions that simultaneously undermined everything those actions were trying to accomplish. In Leonard Okafor's office above the pharmacy, Maya stood at the window and watched the live stream on a laptop that Nora Gill had propped against the windowsill, and the room Leonard, Isaiah Bell, Vera Donna watched with her in the quiet of people observing something they have prepared for and still find difficult to hear. He's not trying to prove anything, Vera said. He's trying to make people tired of knowing what's true. He's framing the frame, Isaiah said, before we finish building the wall. The email arrived while Stills was still speaking, a coordinated blast to local inboxes. No sender name, no legitimate documentation. Subject line reading: questions regarding Maya Collins. Prior misconduct. Review body text full of fragments and insinuations, and a blurred memo with no date and no verifiable origin. The kind of document that is designed not to be believed completely, but to be believed enough to introduce doubt enough to make people wonder enough to make the truth seem like one competing version of events, rather than the only one. Grace Donna's assistant came in from the back room. It's already circulating, 47 shares in 20 minutes. Leonard looked at Maya. We can release the church footage. Right now. It ends this. No, Maya said. Leonard waited. If we release one piece now, he spends the next 3 days attacking that one piece. The angle, the audio quality, the chain of custody, the timing. He makes the evidence the story instead of what the evidence shows. She turned from the window. I want him on record. I want him to choose his lie in public fully, completely, with the whole county watching. Then we answer with everything. She sat at the conference table and drafted the response herself in the tone she had decided on before this morning. No outrage, no lengthy defense, no attempt to match Still's volume. The statement went out under county letterhead within 20 minutes. Chief Maya Collins will not litigate facts through rumor or press conference. The truth will not be decided by volume. It will be proven by records. Effective immediately, the independent audit of warrant alert procedures is hereby expanded to include all financial relationships, third-party compliance contacts, and administrative corrections affecting citizens over the past 6 years. In barbershops and church kitchens and diner booths across Clover County, the response to Still's press conference was not uniformly what he had designed it to be. At the barbershop on Clement Street, the one whose owner had signed over 35% of his business, 2 men in their 60s sat in the waiting chairs watching stills on the wall-mounted television, and one of them said very quietly, I know a man that happened to, and the other man said, I know, and neither of them said anything else because they didn't need to. At the diner on 4th and Main, a retired teacher named Clarice, who had lived in Clover County for 50 years, told the women at her regular Thursday table that she had watched her nephew spend 3 months and most of his savings clearing a warrant that appeared the week before his job interview at the County Water Authority, and that by the time the warrant was cleared the job was gone, and that she had always found the timing of that very strange, and that she had never said so out loud until today. Outside the elementary school on Mercer, a woman named Keisha Ware sat in her car in the parking lot during her lunch break and watched Still's press conference on her phone, and she did not think about the press conference at all. She thought about her father, about the contract he had worked 11 years to earn, about the 8 months between losing it and losing him, and she thought someone is finally looking. She did not know yet that her father's name was in a folder with a red paperclip. She did not know yet that someone had already said his name in a room that would make it matter. Stills finished his press conference and descended the courthouse steps and got into a waiting car with the smooth efficiency of a man who has done what he came to do. Inside Leonard's office, Maya looked at the window for a long moment, then looked at the table at the evidence they had been building piece by careful piece, and she said, "He needed me to answer. I didn't answer. Now we wait for him to do it again." Isaiah said, "He will." "I know," she said. "And this time we'll be ready for everything he says." The phone rang at 6:14 in the morning, and Maya was already awake. She had slept for perhaps 4 hours, in the way you sleep when your mind is doing the kind of work that doesn't stop just because the lights are out, cataloging, connecting, running forward to what comes next, and then running back to check what she might have missed. And when Donna's name appeared on the screen, she answered before the second ring. "Chief Williams?" Donna's voice was so low that Maya had to press the phone tight against her ear and sit up to hear it clearly. "They're reassigning me. I just got the notice on my department email. Facilities inventory effective today." "Facilities inventory," Maya repeated. "Counting folding chairs and checking supply room locks," Donna said. 22 years in records. Maya was out of bed. Isaiah appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, fully awake, with the immediate alertness of someone whose years as a sheriff have trained his nervous system to treat a ringing phone at dawn as information requiring response. "Where are you right now?" Maya asked. "Courthouse parking lot. Back row, far left. I didn't go inside. Stay in your car. We're coming." 20 minutes later, they pulled into the lot as the first pale light was beginning to define the courthouse roofline against the sky, and Donna was in an aging blue sedan with both hands wrapped around a travel mug, though the tea inside it had gone cold, and when Maya got into the passenger seat and Isaiah stood outside near the hood close enough to be present and far enough to give them the privacy the conversation required, Donna handed over a manila envelope without preamble. "There's more than I gave you," she said. "I was afraid to give it all at once. I thought I told myself I was being cautious, but I think I was just—" She stopped. "I think I was still deciding." "You decided?" Maya said. "You're here." Inside the envelope, additional access logs that traced the inactive account across multiple sessions. It had been used not once, but 4 times each time, accessing a specific set of historical files before creating the new alert, as if whoever was using it needed to study the old cases to replicate the pattern convincingly. There were correction request forms signed in full with no explanation beyond clerical error. There were deletion logs for 3 complaint files that should have been retained under the county's standard records retention policy. And there was a flash drive, small and black, with a strip of masking tape across one side, on which Donna had written in careful handwriting a date from 6 months ago. "I recorded it on my phone," Donna said. "After Stills called an all-staff meeting in the records room and told us to clear a citizen complaint that had been filed against Holt harassment during a traffic stop woman with 2 kids, credible witnesses. He told us the complaint had been reviewed and found to be without merit, and the file should be removed from the active system." She paused. "He said it with me standing right there, with 3 other staff members standing right there, like it was the most natural instruction in the world. Like it was Tuesday." "You kept your phone running?" Isaiah said from outside the window. "I'd been carrying it in my hand for 3 weeks," Donna said, "just in case." They drove to Leonard Okafor's office. Nora Gill arrived 10 minutes behind them with an evidence bag and a recorder, and the expression of someone who has been doing this work long enough to have stopped being surprised by anything and started simply being very, very careful. And Donna formally handed over the flash drive, and Nora logged it, and Leonard made a working copy, and then they stood in the room together and waited while the file loaded. The audio began with ambient noise. The records room, the sound of printers, someone's chair scraping, and then Still's voice, closer than the background, the voice of a man speaking to a room that he owns and has always owned, and expects to go on owning. It was not about Maya. It predated the wedding by 6 months, and it was about something older and more general. The methodology, the philosophy, the operational logic of what had been built inside Clover County Police Department across the better part of a decade. And it was in the way that recordings of people who believe they are never being recorded always are utterly unguarded. Still said, people don't push back when they think the system has already decided. You don't need to threaten anyone. You just need them to believe that fighting is more expensive than settling. And then later in the same recording, you don't press the ones with resources and lawyers. You press the ones with something to lose and no one they trust to call. And then the line that made the room go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the October morning outside. If the council ever gets foolish enough to put someone like her in my chair, someone they think is going to come in and clean house, you make the shame happen first. Shame makes people negotiate. Or it makes them disappear. Either way, the problem solves itself. The recording ended. The room was quiet for a long moment. Maya said, "He was already planning for me." "He was planning for anyone who looked like you," Leonard said. "For anyone who came in and threatened the arrangement." "He didn't need to know it was going to be me specifically," Vera said. "He just needed the protocol ready." Donna had her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she was looking at them, and Maya could see the specific weight of what was in her face. Not just the fear of what came next, but the older weight. The weight of 6 months of carrying that recording, and 3 years of carrying Thomas Ware, and 22 years of carrying the accumulated knowledge of a building that had been operating in ways that she knew were wrong, and had told herself every morning that there was nothing she could do about. "There's something else," Donna said without looking up. "Thomas Ware, the man in the file with the red paperclip." She stopped. "I knew him. Not well, but I knew him. He came to the records window once trying to understand what had been filed against him. He was very polite. He brought paperwork showing the contract, showing his business record. He was trying to make me understand that there was a mistake." She stopped again. "I sent him to the corrections window," she said. "I told him to file a review request. I knew the review request would go to Still's office. I knew what would happen to it. And I sent him there anyway because I didn't know what else to do, and then, later," her voice caught. "Later, when I heard what happened to him, I thought about how I could have said something different. I could have said I could have told him to get a lawyer to go to county council to go somewhere that wasn't inside this building." Nobody rushed to absolve her. Maya let the words sit where they belonged in the exact weight they carried for as long as they needed to sit there. Then she said quietly, "You can't give him back what he lost, but you can give his daughter something. You're giving it right now." Donna wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Whistleblower protection goes into effect the moment you formally submit," Nora said. "The process starts today. You're being moved out of Still's chain of command immediately," Isaiah said. "I'll coordinate it with county HR under the sheriff's oversight authority. You're not going back into that building without protection." Donna nodded. She looked at the flash drive in the evidence bag, small and black with its masking tape label, and she looked like a woman who has just watched something very heavy finally get picked up by hands that were designed to carry it. "I should have come forward sooner," she said. "You came forward before he could bury it," Maya said. "In this moment today, that is what matters." Outside the office window, Clover County was beginning its Friday morning cars on Main Street, the diner turning on its neon sign, the courthouse flag being raised by the same maintenance worker who raised it every morning at 7:15 without fail, and inside the file that Warren Stills had spent 6 months preparing for, and 2 decades building had just found the people it needed to find. The emergency session was called for 11 o'clock Friday morning, and by 10:45 the council chamber was full. No announcement had been made to the general public, but Clover County operated on the same informal intelligence network that all small counties operate on, the information that moves through church, secretary phone trees, and diner booth conversations, and the particular way someone's cousin who works at the courthouse mentions casually that something significant is happening this morning, and so the gallery was full of people who had come because they understood without being told specifically that today was a day worth being present for. Council members arranged themselves behind the raised bench. County Attorney Raymond Vick set up his files at the center table. Nora Gill placed the recorder on the table, stated the date and time, and named every person present for the record. Leonard Okafor organized the evidence binders in the order they would be used. Isaiah stood near the side wall in his sheriff's uniform, still and watchful, the particular presence of someone who is not performing authority, but simply possessing it. At the opposite table, Warren Stills sat with his attorney, a man from Atlanta named Braddock, who wore his suit like armor and had the practiced composure of someone very expensive. And behind them, Derek Holt, stiff in his chair, his hands flat on the table in front of him, looking like a man who is trying to decide whether the stillness he's performing is helping. Maya entered last. When she walked through the chamber doors, the room changed the way rooms change when the weight distribution inside them shifts, and she walked to the front table and set her files down and looked at the chamber with the particular steadiness of a person who has been preparing for this specific room, this specific morning, this specific set of facts for 2 days, and who is now here and ready and not afraid. Still's attorney rose immediately. "Madam Chairwoman, we object to this proceeding on foundational grounds. Chief Williams is personally involved in the matter under review, and her participation creates a conflict of interest that renders any outcome of these proceedings legally vulnerable." Patrice Bell looked at him with the measured patience of a woman who has been doing this for 3 decades and has heard this particular objection deployed many times. Then she looked at Maya. Maya stood. That is precisely why every independent oversight mechanism available to this county is present in this room. The county attorney, the independent oversight representative, and Sheriff Tate, who has no reporting relationship to this department. I am not asking this chamber to believe my feelings. I am asking it to review a record. Bell said, "Proceed." Maya began with the false alert. The system log appeared on the screen at the front of the chamber timestamp account identifier terminal number, and she walked through each element with the methodical clarity of someone who respects the room enough to let the facts carry their own weight without embellishment. The alert under her name had been entered 38 minutes before Holt arrived at New Hope Baptist Church. The entering account had been inactive for 14 months prior to that morning. The account was accessed from Terminal 4C inside the Clover County Police Department Records Division. The birth year in the alert was wrong by 1 digit. The address was a street she had never lived on. The phone number listed had not been registered to her for 8 years. "These are not the margins of a clerical error," she said. "A clerical error misfiles 1 field. This alert had 3 fields wrong in the same direction, all of them designed to look close enough to be believed quickly, and none of them designed to survive a patient second look. Stills, technical failures happen. Maya, they happen. What doesn't happen is a technical failure that also sends an officer to interrupt a wedding at the exact moment it was designed to cause maximum public shame." She nodded to Nora. The rear camera footage played on the screen Holt outside the church side door 9 minutes before he entered, checking his phone, leaning toward the other officer, and then the audio low but clear and perfectly captured by Caleb Morrow's equipment still said, "Do it during the vows, before she becomes his wife." The chamber went very still. Still's attorney leaned toward him. Stills did not lean back. He sat with his hands folded, his expression unchanged, and only the fact that he had stopped breathing for 3 seconds visible if you were watching carefully, and Maya had been watching carefully, indicated that the footage had landed exactly where it needed to land. "The audio is ambiguous," his attorney said. Context is unclear, chain of custody is unverified. The raw files and complete metadata have been logged by county independent oversight, Leonard said from his seat. The chain of custody has been documented from the moment the memory cards left Caleb Morrow's camera bag. I am Leonard Okafor, and I personally verified the intake process. Maya had the next image loaded before the attorney finished his objection. The inside of Holt's folder, the enhanced still from the second camera angle, the sticky note, use old number, homicide angle, push hard. WS visible with the clarity that contrast enhancement provides when the underlying image is genuinely there. Stills said, half this county has those initials. And Vera Sims stood up. Half this county, Vera said with the pleasant directness of someone who has spent 30 years waiting for someone to say exactly, this does not have a financial trail running through Meridian Civic Group to a family trust. The chart appeared on the screen, the map of money that Vera had spent 2 days constructing from legitimate banking records and corporate filings, and she walked through it the way she had described it to Maya the night before, without jargon, without unnecessary complexity, in the plain language of someone explaining how a theft works to people who need to understand it clearly enough to act. The alerts, the calls from Garrett Cross, the payments to Meridian Civic Group, the fees that did not exist in any county policy or statute, the reclassifications as clerical errors, the one payment memo WS Advisory approved sitting in the records of a trust connected to Stills's son-in-law. 31 documented cases, she said, approximately $940,000. 3 additional victims who paid not in money but in equity partial ownership of businesses they built with their own hands. She paused. And these were not random people. These were black residents with something to build toward. With businesses, licenses, contracts, reputations, and no political protection. A murmur moved through the gallery. In the 5th row, Keisha Ware was sitting very still with her hands in her lap, and she had been sitting there since before the session started, and nobody knew she was Thomas Ware's daughter except Donna, who had seen her come in and had said nothing. Maya said, I am going to read some names. She opened the folder and read them 31 names first and last in a voice that was steady and clear in the tone of someone who understands that these names have been reduced to administrative shorthand for too long and deserve at minimum to be spoken aloud in a public room by someone who understands what they represent. When she read Thomas Ware, Keisha pressed her hand flat against her mouth. She made no sound. But the woman sitting beside her, a stranger, looked over and then quietly put her hand on Keisha's arm and kept it there. Maya let the names finish. Then she nodded to Nora once more. The audio from Donna's recording filled the chamber. Still's voice unmistakable. Smooth, unguarded, the voice of a man speaking to a room he owns. Explaining the methodology, explaining the selection criteria, and then, near the end, the sentence that made the gallery so quiet that the hum of the ventilation system became audible. If the council ever gets foolish enough to put someone like her in my chair, you make the shame happen first. Shame makes people negotiate, or it makes them disappear. Patrice Bell looked at Warren Stills for a long moment. Then she looked at Holt. Maya looked at Holt too, and she had been watching him throughout, not to punish him with her attention, but because she had come to understand something about Derek Holt in the past 48 hours that made him different from Warren Stills, and the difference mattered not for his sake, but for what she needed to happen next. Stills said to Holt urgently, quietly, "Say nothing." For the first time in 14 years of a career built on following that particular man's instructions, Derek Holt appeared to consider not following it. His attorney grabbed his arm. Holt looked at the arm on his sleeve. He looked at his attorney. Then he looked at Warren Stills, and something crossed his face. Not righteousness, not the transformative moral awakening of a person who has always secretly been better than his choices, but something more ordinary and more honest than that, the expression of a man who has followed someone he trusted to a cliff edge and has just looked down for the first time. He pulled his arm away from his attorney. He said, "Stills told me the alert was verified by a protected source. He gave me the folder the morning of the wedding. He told me the homicide angle would hold a church in a way that fraud alone wouldn't. He said those words exactly, hold a church. He said to push it before the vows, because vows would create political sympathy and the department needed to move before that happened. Holt's voice was rough, not with emotion, but with the friction of saying aloud what had been sitting inside him for 2 days. He told me if her husband moved on me physically to let cameras catch it, he said that would discredit them both. In the gallery, someone said very quietly, "Lord." Isaiah's hands, folded in front of him, tightened once. Released. Maya reached into the folder and removed the County Road 14 accident report. She walked it across the room and set it on the table in front of Holt without saying anything about it, without announcement, without drama, just placed it in front of him the way you place a document in front of someone when you want them to read it. He read it. She watched his face. The moment when he found the relevant section adult female vehicle accident first responder, declined identification due to undercover operational security. Rescuer, sustained burn to left wrist registered on his face the way things register when you are reading something and the meaning arrives before the words are finished. He looked up. She lifted her left wrist. The cuff marks from the wedding were still visible, fading but present, and beneath them on the inside of her wrist, the old curved scar. Holt looked at it for a long time. He said barely above a whisper, "Sandra." "Your sister Maya said." He looked at the scar the way a man looks at something that reorients every other thing in the room around it, and then he looked at the marks above it, the marks that his own cuffs had made 2 days ago over a wrist that his family had been praying about for 2 years, and something in his face did something that was not crying, but was its close neighbor. "I didn't know," he said. "No," Maya said. "You didn't ask." The silence held. Then Holt looked at Patrice Bell and he said, "I'll cooperate. Everything I know. Names, dates, which officers received payments, which supervisors approved the reclassifications where Cross met with victims. All of it." Stills stood. "He's compromised. This is coercion. I was useful," Holt said, looking at Stills with the flat, exhausted directness of a man who has just run out of reasons to pretend. "That's different." Bell called the vote. The suspension of Captain Warren Stills, pending full investigation and referral to state and federal authorities, passed unanimously. As the gavel fell, the composure that Stills had maintained for 28 years through every difficult meeting, every accountability review, every challenge that had come and been managed and been made to go away, finally showed its seam just a single crack, just enough for the room to see the man underneath the institution he had built around himself. It was enough. They deactivated his access card in the hallway outside the chief's suite, and it took less than 45 seconds, and Stills stood there with his attorney beside him, while it happened adjusting his cuffs with the habitual precision of a man whose dignity has always lived in his details. And Maya watched from the far end of the corridor, because she had decided that she would not look away from this, not because it gave her satisfaction, but because the people whose names she had read in that chamber had not been allowed to watch the thing that was done to them, and so she would watch this for them. For he saw her watching. He walked toward her with the unhurried pace of a man who has decided that whatever happens next, he will meet it on his own terms, and he said, "You think this makes you clean, Chief Williams?" "No," she said. "A badge doesn't make anyone clean. It only reveals what was already in them." He had no answer for that. She could see him looking for the particular blankness of a man whose gift has always been the right word at the right moment, encountering for the first time a moment for which he has not prepared. And then Braddock touched his arm and they moved toward the elevator, and Maya watched them go. And then she turned back to the work. Holt's formal statement to the state investigators took 4 hours and filled 62 pages. He gave them names, officers who had received envelopes from Garrett Cross at 3 different meetings over 4 years. He gave them supervisors who had approved reclassification requests without reviewing the underlying files. He gave them the coffee shop where Cross met victims, the specific table he preferred, the phrase he used to open every conversation. He gave them dates when Stills had personally reviewed alert files before they were entered signed memos with his initials that matched the WS Advisory approved notation in Meridian's records. He did not ask for mercy, he received none. By nightfall, the state attorney general's office had opened a criminal inquiry and federal financial investigators had been formally notified about Meridian Civic Group. And Garrett Cross, reached by phone at a hotel in Savannah, said he had no comment and then immediately called a lawyer, which was comment enough. Every alert in the system that had been marked clerical error in the past 6 years was placed under independent review. The County IT Division, under Nora Gill's oversight, froze all warrant alert logs, correction queues, and deleted administrative files pending examination. 31 families would be hearing something they had never expected to hear. Maya entered the chief's office for the first time at 9 o'clock that evening, and she stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the room, the polished desk, the leather chair, the framed commendations on the wall and above the credenza, Still's preferred piece of decor, a framed print bearing the phrase "Order Before Optics" in large, clean type, and she crossed the room and took it down and set it face down in the corner without particular drama, the way you remove something from a wall because the wall belongs to you now and you have different things to say. She found a blank sheet of paper in the desk drawer and a marker in the pen cup, and she wrote in her own handwriting 9 words. "A badge is not a weapon. It is a promise." She folded a piece of masking tape across the top and pressed it to the wall, temporary and direct and exactly what she meant. Isaiah appeared in the doorway with 2 paper cups of coffee from the diner across the street. He looked at the paper on the wall for a moment, then at her. "You forgot dinner." I remembered Justice. Justice is not a food group, Maya. She took the coffee and they stood together in the dim office. No cameras, no attorneys, no oversight representative, no institutional weight of any kind, just a husband and a wife in a room that had been held hostage by someone's worst choices and was now beginning to become something else. Isaiah looked at the folder of names on the desk. "How many have called already?" 6 families before 5 o'clock, Maya said. "The intake line opens at 8 tomorrow morning." And Stills. "Not finished," she said. "Suspension is only the door opening. The money. Across the full network that takes time, we keep working." He nodded. She looked at the 9 words on the wall written in her own hand, taped with 2 pieces of masking tape, and she thought about her father, who had told her once that the difference between justice and revenge was patience, and that patience was not the same as waiting. Patience was the willingness to do the work, even when the work was slow and unglamorous and happened in rooms nobody was filming. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. Outside the window, Clover County was quiet under a clear October night, and inside the office, the 9 words on the wall held their place above the credenza, temporary and exact, and the work that had not yet been done was waiting patiently to be begun. The reforms were not dramatic. That was the first thing Maya understood about real change. It did not arrive with a ceremony or a press conference or the particular electricity of a public moment that everyone agrees to remember. It arrived in policy language and procedure updates and the unglamorous specificity of institutional redesign. And if you were not the kind of person who found meaning in that kind of work, then you would not survive it. And Maya had always been exactly that kind of person. Every warrant alert now required 2-person verification before entry into the system. Inactive administrative accounts were identified, audited, and terminated, 43 of them across the department that had been sitting dormant and accessible for anywhere between 1 and 9 years, each one a door that should have been locked. Any correction made to a citizen's record generated a permanent log that no local administrator could modify or remove. It existed in a parallel layer of the system, accessible only to county council oversight and state-level review. Outside fees connected to warrant matters were prohibited unless explicitly authorized by state statute and reviewed by an independent body. Whistleblower complaints were routed entirely outside the department chain of command to a new external inbox managed jointly by the county attorney and the oversight office. None of this made headlines. The intake process did. Maya had set up the intake line on Monday morning private rooms, not lobby desks, because she understood that the people coming in had already been humiliated once by this building and would not come back to be humiliated again. And what they deserved was a closed door and a chair at a table, and someone who would take notes carefully and say, "Your name has been noted, and your case will be reviewed, and mean it, and actually do it." The bakery owner, whose husband had paid $32,000 to Garrett Cross after a fraud alert appeared before his wholesale licensing renewal, came in on Monday afternoon with a folder of her own receipts. Correspondence bank statements that she had kept for 4 years in a box in the back of the bakery office because she couldn't throw them away and couldn't look at them, and she sat across from Maya in the intake room and set the folder on the table between them and said simply, "I just want someone to say that we were right." "You were right," Maya said. "Your name was used without your consent, and what was taken from you was taken wrongfully. That will be documented formally with this department's acknowledgement." The woman looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "My husband cried for 3 days after we paid them. He thought he'd done something weak. He thought he'd let me down." She paused. "He's been carrying that for 4 years. He was protecting his business and his family with the only option they left him," Maya said. "That's not weakness." The contractor came on Tuesday with his rubber-banded folder, the same one he had carried to this building twice before, on both occasions being sent to the corrections window. On both occasions receiving a form letter that said the matter was under administrative review, and he set it on the intake desk and said he had been waiting 5 years for someone to ask, and the woman behind the desk wrote down his name and his case number and gave him a receipt with a follow-up date on it, and he stood there looking at the receipt for a moment before he put it in his shirt pocket. Keisha Ware came in on Tuesday afternoon. She had called ahead, and Maya had asked to take the meeting herself. Keisha was 31, with her father's eyes and her father's particular quality of stillness. The stillness of someone who has learned because they had to how to absorb difficulty without displaying it. And she sat across from Maya in the small intake room and folded her hands on the table and said without preamble, "I'm not here for money." "I know," Maya said. "I don't want a settlement. I don't want a payment. I want—" She stopped. "My father was a good man who built a good business and refused to pay for something he didn't do. And the county took everything from him for that. I want the county to say so. In writing. With his name spelled correctly." Maya had already drafted it. She slid the document across the table, 1-page county letterhead, signed with her full name, in the same handwriting that appeared on the 9-word note on her office wall, and it read, "Thomas Edward Ware was wronged by the administrative practices of this department. The alert filed against him in May 2021 was generated fraudulently without evidentiary basis as part of a coordinated pattern of abuse. His record is clear. His name is restored." Keisha read it twice. She folded it in half precisely along the center crease and tucked it into her bag. She did not cry in the room. When Donna walked her to the front entrance, Keisha stopped in the doorway and turned back, and she said to Donna quietly, "Did you know my father when he came in here trying to fix it?" Donna looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I knew him. I wish I had done more." Keisha nodded once, the nod of someone who is deciding to accept an answer rather than press it further, and then she walked out into the October afternoon and sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time, and Donna watched her through the glass door and did not look away. Holt had been gone from the building for 2 weeks when Maya ran into him at the bottom of the front steps. He had left through those same doors on the day after the council session without his badge, without his service weapon, without the 14 years of authority that had been the organizing principle of his adult life. And reporters had called his name from the curb, and he had not answered. And at the bottom of the steps he had stopped when he saw Maya standing near the entrance, and they had looked at each other, and he had said, "I gave them everything I know." "I heard," she said. "It won't fix what I did." "No," she said. It will only determine whether you keep doing harm after knowing the truth." He looked at her wrist, the marks nearly healed now, the old scar quiet beneath them, and then looked away. "Sandra wants to thank you." "Tell her to live well," Maya said. "That's thanks enough," he asked then, quietly and without expectation. "What about you? What do you need from me?" "I'm not your absolution officer, Holt," she said, "but understanding that starting from that is something. Start there." He walked away smaller than he had entered her life, and that was not punishment, and it was not justice in the full sense of the word, and it was not enough for Thomas Ware or the 30 other families whose names were in the folder, but it was honest, and honesty, Maya had learned, was where everything else had to begin. Vera Sims continued tracing Meridian's money through its shell structure, and 2 more connected companies surfaced in the 3rd week, and the investigation expanded outward, and 2 neighboring counties began requesting access to the methodology so they could run their own audits, and a state legislative committee announced a hearing on warrant alert verification that the committee chair described publicly as long overdue. The bill they were drafting was not going to be named after anyone. Maya had asked them not to name it after anyone. Name it after what it fixes, she had said. That's what will last. 1 month after the interrupted wedding, New Hope Baptist Church opened its doors on a Saturday afternoon in November, and there were no patrol cars outside, and no one stood in the aisle with a folder, and the air inside the sanctuary smelled the same as it always had. Candle wax and white roses and the faint trace of whatever someone always brought from the reception kitchen, even when you told them the reception didn't start until after the ceremony. The ivory gown had been cleaned and pressed, and the tear near the hem where the train had caught on the pew when Holt kept walking had been repaired by the seamstress on Clement Street, with such care that the only evidence of it was in the particular way the fabric hung at that spot, slightly different from the rest, an imperceptible difference that became perceptible only if you already knew where to look. Maya knew where to look. She stood in the bridal room in front of the narrow mirror and looked at it and decided that she did not want to not know where it was, and she would not try to forget. Her father's pocket square was in the bouquet wrapped around the stems in the same position as a month ago, and she had placed it there herself this morning, the way she had placed it there last time, slowly, deliberately, as the closest thing to prayer she knew. Aunt Gloria stood behind her. She did not rush past what had happened between them. She had called Maya twice in the weeks following, and both times Maya had answered, and they had talked carefully around the thing that needed to be said directly, and now they were here in this room together, and Gloria reached up and touched the back of the veil, and then stopped and met Maya's eyes in the mirror. "I doubted you," she said, "in that church when he held up those papers. I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it, and you saw it, and I know you saw it." "I did," Maya said. "Fear may explain it, baby, but it doesn't excuse it. I should have known your name better than their paperwork." Gloria's voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has been practicing this sentence and has made peace with the fact that it is insufficient and has decided to say it anyway, because insufficiency is not a reason for silence. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, "It hurt," she said. "The way being doubted by someone who loves you always hurts, which is differently than being doubted by a stranger. More specifically." "I know, but we are still here," Maya said. And she reached back and took her aunt's hand briefly, firmly, and Gloria pressed it once, and then let go, because they both knew that the ceremony was about to begin, and there was no more time. And that was all right, because some things do not need to be fully resolved to be fully felt and fully forgiven. The sanctuary was full. Grace Moreau from this bakery sat in the 4th row in a purple dress. The contractor with the rubber-banded folder was 2 pews behind her, wearing a tie that looked like it had been located and pressed specifically for this occasion. Donna Raines sat in the 3rd row with her back straight, and her hands in her lap in the navy dress she had been saving for something, and this was the something. Vera Sims had her program in her lap and her reading glasses on top of her head. Leonard Okafor had found a fresh suit and a fresh pocket square, and he sat beside Nora Gill, who was not recording anything today. Caleb Morrow stood at the rear of the church with his camera, and this time he was filming Joy, and the difference in how he held himself showed. Keisha Ware sat in the 5th row. Nobody had told her to come. She had come because she needed to see what answered back looked like in a room in an afternoon with flowers and people who were choosing to be present for something good. And she held a single white daisy across her lap and looked at the altar and let herself believe, at least for this afternoon, that the county she lived in was capable of being something better than what it had been. Isaiah stood at the altar. He had the particular stillness of a man who has walked through something difficult and come out the other side knowing more about what he is made of than he did before, and he stood with his hands clasped in front of him and his eyes on the doors at the back of the sanctuary, and when the organ began, he let out a long, quiet breath that nobody near him noticed. The doors opened. Maya stepped into the aisle. The congregation rose slowly, naturally, the way people rise when they want to acknowledge something rather than because they've been told to, and Maya walked forward in the ivory gown with the repaired hem and the bouquet with her father's pocket square and the faint marks on her wrists that were almost healed, but not quite, not entirely, and she felt all of it as she walked the pew where Aunt Gloria had gone silent, the spot on the floor near the front where the white rose had fallen, the corner of the bench that had bruised her side when Holt kept walking, the memory of the cuffs, the memory of the church doors closing, the memory of Isaiah standing in the aisle with the bouquet and the pocket square, and his face carrying everything he felt and choosing to wait. She felt all of it. None of it stopped her. When she reached Isaiah, he took her hand and his thumb moved once very gently across the inside of her left wrist, not over the scar, just beside it, and he looked at her and said quietly enough that only she could hear, "You ready?" Maya looked at the altar. She looked at Reverend Hayward, who was smiling the particular smile of someone who has seen a great deal and is still capable of being moved. She looked at the faces of the people who had come, Grace and the contractor and Donna and Keisha and Leonard and Vera and Caleb, the people who had been part of the 30 days between the interrupted ceremony and this one who had done the work that made this afternoon possible. "Yes," she said. "This time I am." Reverend Hayward opened the ceremony with the words she had chosen carefully. Some vows are delayed, not because love is weak, but because truth had to arrive first. A soft sound moved through the sanctuary, the kind that is not quite an amen but means the same thing. The vows were exchanged. When Bell pronounced them husband and wife, the applause that filled New Hope Baptist Church was not the loud, reflexive applause of a crowd performing celebration. It was deep and earned and full of all the things that had happened in the 30 days between this moment and the last time they had stood in this room together. And it was the kind of sound that takes time to grow and that once heard, you do not forget. At the reception there was fried chicken and sweet tea and peach cobbler from the diner on 4th and Main, and Vera made a toast that began with something about clean balance sheets and ended with something about completed vows, and Leonard said something about records, and Caleb said he was fairly confident this version of the wedding video was going to be better, and Isaiah laughed a real laugh, full and unguarded, the laugh of a man who has been carrying a great deal and has, for this afternoon at least, set it down. On the church steps at dusk, Maya and Isaiah stood alone for a moment while the party continued inside, and the Georgia November sky had gone purple at the edges, and she could see the courthouse in the distance over the dark line of the trees. "What comes next?" Isaiah asked. Maya thought about Benton's investigation still unfolding, about Meridian's money still being traced, about the 31 families still in the process of having their names returned to them, about the state legislature, and the bill that would be named after what it fixed about the morning intake line, and the people who would come tomorrow with their rubber-banded folders. "We keep our promises," she said. Isaiah took her hand. They stood there together in the evening, husband and wife, and the work that remained was waiting for Monday morning, patient and necessary and vast, and the October air smelled of wood smoke and the faint sweetness of the reception kitchen, and inside the church the candles were still burning steady and unhurried as they always had been. The following Monday morning, a woman walked into the Clover County Police Department carrying a canvas bag and a folder tied with kitchen string. Not rubber bands, string the kind used to bind things that matter, and she did not give her name at the front desk before she spoke. She set the folder down and said that her husband had paid Garrett Cross $18,000 in 2020 to make a warrant disappear before their restaurant's health inspection, and that the warrant had disappeared as promised, and that she wanted the money back, and she said it the way you say something you have decided is simply true, like a door you have already decided to walk through. In the chief's office down the hall, the masking tape had been replaced with a proper frame. Same 9 words, no date, no signature, no name attached to them. Donna Raines was in the room next door showing a junior staff member how to read a backup log, how to find the record that was meant to be erased, explaining with patient clarity where old systems hide their ghosts. She had been doing this every morning for 3 weeks. She planned to continue. At a law school in Nashville, a first-year student sat with a laptop in the library after her last class and typed Clover County versus Meridian Civic Group into the search bar. The file was 412 pages. She read the first paragraph and then the last, and then she started from the beginning, and outside the library window the city was moving in the ordinary way of cities, people who trusted the process because life was too hard to question every stamp and signature, and she closed her door and kept reading, because someone had to. If this story stayed with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below your words. Help us bring more stories like this one to our channel. And if you believe in the kind of justice Maya fought for, consider sharing this with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story worth telling.